Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining today's session on homelessness in our schools. Just a couple reminders. Before we get started, please keep your microphones and cameras off to eliminate distraction. Also, if you have questions, please type them in the chat box and I will relay them to our presenter as we go along. And lastly, we are no longer doing certificates of participation or completion. So just a reminder of that. So with that, I will turn it over to our presenter, Charisse Ronis. Charisse, if you're talking, you're on mute.
I'm not talking. I was trying to, my screens are split and it wasn't giving me my option of my little square to put myself back on. So I
No
apologize.
problem.
1 second. Do you want me to have my camera on or does it matter? Or because can they see
That's
me if I,
that's totally up to you if you want it on or off. You don't, it doesn't matter.
okay, got it. But they can just see the screen that I have up now, right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. We'll just do that. All right. Yes, so my name is Charisse Ronis, and I am the homeless liaison for Bismarck Public Schools. I have been doing this position for about 10 years, and I wanted to just kind of talk to you guys today a little bit about what that looks like and what we do here, and what are the types of students that we work with amongst our district here in Bismarck. Excuse me. First of all, just kind of a little bit about my background. I'm a social worker by trade, so I've been a social worker for 25 years. Like I said, I have been in this position for almost 10 years. And my background has always been working with at-risk families and youth. And so I have a history of working in the juvenile court system. I was a school social worker on Standing Rock Reservation. I've worked with outreach programs within the Bismarck, Mandan, and Standing Rock region. I also worked for Burleigh County Social Services for a period of time, and I also was a guardian at Lightum. So my background, again, has always been with children and families at risk, but having a variety of different agencies that I've worked with, I feel has really helped me in the position that I'm at now, and knowing the system, understanding the system, and being able to help our parents and families navigate through that system. I work for all 26 schools in the Bismarck School District. So that's all the elementary, middle school, and high school. And we also work through the 0 through 5 age range that we try to identify as best as we can. And then also we work with kids up to the age of 21. So if they maybe need to get their GED because they're going to age out of high school before they can complete all of their credits, we assist them in getting their GED up until the age of 21. And so I have a staff of 2. They have split up and work with families within their own feeder systems within the Bismarck Public School System. And that's new. They've only been with me for 2 years. Before that, I was doing the position by myself. The biggest thing that we do in our office here is we connect families with resources throughout the community, and we identify those homeless students and their families. And so it is our job to, whether it's getting referrals or reaching out to previous families, we try to identify them as soon as we can. What we do is in August, before school starts, we come back and we assess the current students who are in our program from the previous year that we identified, and we have to re-identify them. So we have to contact them, reach out, to try to find them, whether it's through phone, email, texting, home visits, to see if they're still in that current situation. And if they are, then they would be in our program again for the upcoming school year. Once a student has been identified as considering to be in transition or homeless, they are in our program for the entire school year. So they would be identified and get those services until the end of May, no matter what. So if they find permanent housing, or if they, switch where they're living a couple different times throughout the school year, it doesn't matter. They still have access to the services that we provide, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. We also want to make sure that we connect students with assistance to be able to function in a day-to-day education, and that make that experience the best that it can be, no matter what's going on in their home life or how many times they've had to transition to different places to live, or what might be going on in the after hours when they return home after every day. We just want to make sure that they have the best opportunities, just like everybody else does, that would actually are dealing, not dealing with housing issues. That's kind of what I do, my job in a nutshell. I also do a lot of community outreach. So I do things like this, like presentations, trainings, those kinds of things to local agencies, businesses that'll have me presenting at any kind of like child welfare training or anything like that, to talk about homelessness amongst youth in North Dakota. It's not a very happy topic to talk about, but I don't think a lot of people understand the severity of it and what is actually going on right here in our community. And so I do that. We also have fundraisers that we do to raise money for the program. And then just being a part of several boards and those kinds of things amongst the community that help me network and know organizations and resources so I can better help my families, is kind of what I do. So right now, if you want to just enter your guesses in the chat, and I don't know if I can see the chat, I don't think I can, but if maybe Kylie wants to just let me know some of the numbers, but if you want to put in what your guess is for last year's school year, how many youth were identified in just Bismarck Public Schools, that would be all 26 of them, and how many that we identified last school year.
So far we have 500, 256, 34, 872, 750, 376, 700, 97, 108, 32, 1025, 72, 489, 985.
Okay.
A wide
Okay.
range.
Yes, it is. It is. Some of those numbers give me a panic attack, but basically what we identified last year is, come on now, what's going on? 474. So that doesn't mean that that's every student in transition or homeless child. That just means those are the ones that we were made aware of and were able to serve throughout the school year. We'll go through in a little bit the kind of the range of what we deal with when it comes to our numbers, and since the program's been going on, how many students we typically serve every year. This is about average. We tend to stay around the 450, 500 range lately. And so this is, to us, this is nothing new, but to a lot of people, 474 kids, that's about the size of like Moses Elementary and Centennial Elementary. So if you imagined all those kids in one area, it kind of tends to be a big number. So how many do we have currently? Which means, we have a couple weeks left of school here. And so our numbers, we stop taking numbers at the end of the school year. So currently we have 414 that have been identified. So we are a little bit low. These do include the numbers of the 0 through 5 age range, as well as our GED students. And so we just were having a conversation, my staff and I, this morning about kind of being in this lull the last 2 months where we haven't gotten a lot of new cases or new identifiable referrals. But the ones that we currently have are very intense, very chronic, are a lot of case management and a lot of work. So I guess for us, it's kind of nice not to have the new ones come through, but I don't know, there's really no indication of why we've slowed down. Last year, in most years, we are going hard right until the end, and identifying kids up until the last week of school. So maybe that will start here after, of course, I said it out loud, but I think, there can be many different reasons for that. I do know that we have had an influx of EL students with what's going on in the world. And so that was a lot we were seeing after Christmas. We're seeing a lot of those kinds of families come in. But yeah, the last 2 months have been kind of on a low end for us, which is a little abnormal. But it's kind of nice. So basically, what do those numbers mean, or what does that look like? So basically, there's two different definitions of homelessness. So if I had said to you guys, and I say this, I speak to fifth graders every year in November, that's National Homeless Awareness Month. And I speak to them and I ask them the question of, if on my way here to see you, if I told you that I saw a homeless person, what would be in your mind? And we talk out loud, they just kind of holler out things that they envision this person looking like. And it's always negative. It's always dirty, tangled hair, ripped clothes, maybe having a cardboard sign, no teeth. I mean, it's kind of interesting the things that they come up with, but none of it is never positive. And then I say, okay, now in your mind, when you envision that person, did you envision that person to be a man or a woman? And most will say man, and they say older, an older gentleman, which is kind of a par with what the society has kind of made a homeless look like, stereotypically. But then I asked them if they would imagine that person with the same characteristics that they hollered out. So the dirty, the no teeth, all those kinds of things, that it was a child, if that was a child that I had saw. And then their eyes get really big, trying to imagine that. And so when people think about homelessness, they don't normally think about youth. And just for example, the 474, we don't see 474 kids laying out on the street, under newspapers or by the river or in the alleyways or whatever. We don't see that. And so we don't envision that that's actually real. I have some people who want to challenge me sometimes on the high number. There's no way that there's that many. But there is, because there's two kind of definitions of homelessness. And the first one is the HUD's definition, which an individual or family who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, meaning that they have a primary nighttime residence that is public or private place not meant for human habitation. So in the streets, on the park bench, those kinds of places, or is living in publicly or privately operated shelter. So this definition is the HUD definition. What we use in the education system is the Department of Ed definition. And so I'm going to forward on to that and then explain a little bit about those differences and why there's such a big gap in them. So we use this definition, the children who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So fixed means you can't move it. So it's not movable. It's not a tent. It's not on wheels. It's something that is stationary and can't be moved. Regular obviously means on a regular basis, so more than, once here, once there, those kinds of things. And then adequate nighttime residence would be, adequate is the question, and it's left to our discretion. So, every liaison might say adequate is different. Their type of adequate is different. I basically use just common sense, I feel like, and I use, are their basic needs being met? Do they have a roof over their head? Do they have running water? Do they have adequate food? Is it warm? Do they have heat? Those kinds of things that are like the basic necessities, I feel, if you're going to be considered, housed. And so basically looking at that definition, then we kind of had different categories that the kids that we work with fall under. And so the first one is hotels, and mostly motels. And so they're paying by the week. They're there because their credit is bad. They maybe have felonies. There could be other reasons. Maybe they're a sex offender, but there's other reasons why they can't get somebody to rent to them. And so they're staying in motels, and paying atrocious amounts of money to stay there, in probably not the best places. They're not maybe clean or run well or safe people staying there. And so it's really not ideal, especially when you have children involved. Campgrounds. So obviously camper you can pick up and move, or a tent. When I first started this job, it was right after the oil boom. And so our campgrounds were full, and the RVs that were there were massive, and they were nicer than my own home. And so those people were not considered to be in transition. That was the life they chose. That was their house. They were paying lot rent to stay there for months at a time. And so they were not considered to be in transition. But the families we work with are there sometimes day to day, sometimes week by week, and either have a small camper that doesn't have maybe heat, or anything like that, or even a tent that we've experienced. Any kind of shelter. So if they're in an emergency shelter, they're in our domestic violence shelter, they could be in any transitional shelter. That could be sober living, if they're able to have their children with them. We have a facility in town that's run by one of the tribes that the mothers can have their children with them during their treatment. And so they live in apartments, but that's considered transitional living. And then we also have unaccompanied youth, or youth that are 18 to 24 that live in our YouthWorks local living places. And so they have basically apartments or townhomes that they stay in while they're going through the YouthWorks transitional program, to be able to get out on their own and afford a place on their own, and know those kind of basic life skills. So those kids are ones that we work with. Obviously, the substandard housing, not designed for a person to live in. So some of the examples that we've experienced have been living in a storage unit, or maybe they know a mechanic who has his own shop and he has a living quarters. And I say that in quotations because there's no heat, there's no running water, there's no electricity. It's just a place above that they put an air mattress in so they could sleep there at night. We've had places like that. We have had instances where family has said to another family, I'll help you out where you can stay in my garage, but I'm locking my doors and you cannot come in and use the bathroom. You cannot get any food. You can't use any of the water. You can't do your laundry. You can't shower. It's basically a place to have over your head in the winter. And it's also not heated in my garage. So here's some blankets and pillows and such, and you're gonna have to be on your own for everything else. So we've had lots of situations, like that. We've had families that are found trying to sleep under like the stairwells in hotels. and try to hide from hotel staff until they're caught. We have families who maybe they have 4 or 5 families in one apartment that only has like 2 bedrooms. And so sometimes they're sleeping out in the hallways until they get found or kicked out or told that they have to leave. Many different scenarios, basically trying to find, obviously from our winters, shelter from the cold that we experience, during the winter. So they basically will take anything. Families who are living in cars or staying in cars, we do have that more often than people think. So, they are in the Walmart parking lots or they're in some sort of place where they're allowed to stay in their car with no questions asked. But again, no running water, nothing like that they have access to. And then the 2 biggest groups that we work with are doubled up, which means if my family was evicted and I called my friend and said, can we come and stay with your family just until we save money or until we get a different place? And she says yes, then we go and we move in with them. But we're not on the lease. We don't pay mortgage. We don't pay her anything because we can't afford to. So we're basically doubled up in her home because of a financial hardship. Now, sometimes there are situations where a family chooses that. One family says, we can live together. You don't have to pay me any rent, but then you're going to take care of my kids while I work during the day. Or they have some sort of arrangement to where it's something that they chose to do and that they kind of planned it. Those families don't fall under our program either. And doubled up, a lot of people look at it and say, well, at least they have a roof over their head. But they also don't have the sense of safety, because at any moment, for any reason, that person can ask them to leave, and they have to abide by it. They don't have a leg to stand on. I will never forget my first year here. I had a social worker from a school call me and say that a parent was there, had dropped off her kid at school and came in to talk to her and was very upset and emotional. They had just gotten kicked out. She had nowhere to go. And so they wanted me to come and talk to her. And when I got there, you could tell was in shock, but also was, super sad and stressed, in where she had been staying with her sister and her family for like 4 or 5 months. She thought it was going well. There never had really been any major incidents that she was aware of. But that morning, her daughter had burnt toast in the kitchen. And for whatever reason, her sister, it triggered her. And she said, that's it. I am tired of this. And kind of just let everything spill that she had been holding in. The kids do this, the kids don't do that. You guys do this, you guys don't do that. This is the last straw. Now my house smells like, burnt toast. I'm over it. And you guys have until noon to get your stuff out and find a different place. So basically, being evicted or asked to leave right away. So the doubled up standard, yes, it is a roof over their head, but it is a temporary, and at any point they can be asked to leave, and they would have to abide by that by law. And then our unaccompanied youth, which is a really hard thing to explain because it's very, very gray, and the federal law does not help with that. But in a nutshell, it is a child or children who are living with somebody other than their biological parents, and that there's no legal documentation indicating that the people they are staying with are their legal guardians or their custodians or have any kind of legal to stand over them, to make decisions for them. A lot of this is, parents who are incarcerated, parents who go to treatment, parents who just are unhealthy themselves and can't take care of even themselves. And so their kids are living with relatives or friends. But there's no court documents. They didn't go to any kind of a court system to get anything in play. And so basically those people in the home that have kind of taken over that role for those kids, we call them caregivers. And so they're able to access their educational records and things like that just as a parent, because they are acting as in place of a parent, even though there's not a legal document there. Sometimes we get, unaccompanied youth who are living here and have a family, and their family is very well off, but there is some sort of a conflict, whether it's on the parent side or whether it's on the child's side. They don't want to be there anymore. They want to follow the rules. If they're under 18, they're considered to be an unaccompanied youth if they're kicked out. So if they go stay with a friend, or they go stay with grandma, or they go stay someplace else because they're not getting along with their parents, they're automatically in our program and considered to be an unaccompanied youth. And so they would be able to provide services for us. So we have a lot of couch surfing kids, a lot of kids who have been left to be on their own at a very young age, but are still wanting to continue their education and get their high school diploma or their GED somehow. So those are kind of the different groups of the kids that we work with. So because there's such a variety of ways they can come into the program, it's our identification process is really important. We have to ask a lot of hard questions. Sometimes they feel like we're, being nosy. It's none of our business. And we understand that. Some parents do not want to say that they're living in one of these situations because they are afraid social services will be called and their kids will be taken away, which is not true. That's not what we do. And you can't remove a child just because their family's homeless. That's under Century Code. But they're scared, and rightfully so. And so they don't want to give us that information right away. But usually down the road somehow, whether it's the child or transportation is an issue, or something is happening to where the kid's not getting the proper education, to where we start asking some questions, and then we come to find out their situation of, they were living here, but now, they were kicked out and they've been kind of bebopping around since then, or whatever the case may be. We eventually will usually find out, and then we can offer some services to them, and hopefully help out with some of those barriers that they see. So when I was talking earlier about like all the federal laws and things like that, there's actually a federal law that protects the homeless students and our homeless youth. And it's called the McKinney-Vento Law, or McKinney-Vento Act. And it basically was put into play in 1987 to ensure that it doesn't matter what experience the child is having in regards to being housed or not housed, but that they have the same opportunity and access to the free public education that any other child has. And so we, our biggest, I would say, rule with that is that we try to make sure that the student has stability in their education, even though they might not have it, in their home life. And so we try and make sure that they can stay in what we call the school of origin. And that's where they started school that year. So if they started in South Bismarck and they were attending school in South Bismarck, and then they ended up getting kicked out there, they had to move, and they ended up staying with somebody else, maybe up in North Bismarck, but they don't have transportation to get to school. And if they're not in their school boundary, they don't get busing. So then we step in and we provide some sort of transportation to make sure that they can remain at that school and have that school stability throughout the entire school year. Otherwise, some of these children would be moving schools every time they find a different place to live. And that we just know that that's not feasible and doesn't work when you're trying to move forward in your educational experience. So that's the biggest thing that we try and do every day, is making sure that those kids have that access to their education. And it all starts with the simple thing as transportation. And this is just a little bit more about, what an unaccompanied youth is, because it is such a gray area. And then, there's some little extra rights and rules that unaccompanied youth have, when they are considered unaccompanied youth. And an unaccompanied youth can be So like the Century Code law would state that it's an unaccompanied youth, but maybe they would not necessarily qualify for a program. And that would be somebody who maybe by law, they're unaccompanied because they're staying with somebody, but because that person has the financial means to take care of them. And maybe it was planned. Maybe we have some instances where students come from other rural areas and they come to Bismarck to go to school and they say, we're bringing our kids here because we want them to have better opportunity. And so if it's a planned thing, if you're planning to do that and it was a choice you made to do so, or a choice that they're going to come here and stay with aunt because they want more opportunities in their education or sports or whatever it might be, those students are not considered to be in our program or receive our services. So if it's a planned thing, basically, they don't qualify. And then we talk about, that we must identify them and we have to try to figure out who meets that eligibility and who doesn't, because every case is different and has little details that the previous case or the case after that is not going to have. And so we have to try to be as fair as we can and do the same for everybody. But sometimes that isn't always the case because of background or instances or situations that each youth brings to the table when we're trying to identify them. So how do we find them, or how do we, how are they identified? The first piece is that we do a registration process. So in Bismarck, we do not have open enrollment. So if a student comes in and they're not able to provide the two proof of residency where they're staying or their parents can't, then a kind of a red flag comes up. And so then we kind of start asking the questions about where are they staying or where are they living. And then that's usually kind of how we start that process of meeting with the family and interviewing them, and then kind of determining at that point if they are in fact a student in transition. All the shelters in town, we usually get notification when a family moves in there. And so then once we know that, we can make sure that the kids are able to get there, whether it's busing or whatever transportation we have to put into place, or get them enrolled in school quickly, those kinds of things. The hotel and campground referrals. And so sometimes we go out to the campgrounds in August to see if there's anyone out there that they feel is sticking around for a while, that maybe we can go visit and make sure their kids are enrolled in school. Same with hotels. Some of the main hotels that we normally have our families staying in, we'll reach out to them and go out to them and help them get that registration process going if they haven't already. We work a lot with agencies in town who work with the homeless, and so Youth Works and social services and all kinds of organizations. They might be meeting with the family or have a family as their client and then realize, wow, the school should probably really need to know about this because they might have services that they could offer these students. And so they'll reach out as well and give us referrals. We work very closely with the Mandan Public School Liaison. We have a lot of families that go back and forth between Bismarck and Mandan throughout the school year, just due to availability in housing or pricing is different, whatever the case may be. We work very, very closely with Mandan and keep tabs on them so we don't let them fall through the cracks by going back and forth. And then obviously inter-school referrals. So we have our school social workers, our admin, our staff, our teachers. The biggest ones, the two that you might not think would be so important, but are the secretaries of the schools and bus drivers, and even people who work in the cafeteria. And I say this because students might not see them as a scary authority figure. So they're not a teacher, they're not a principal, they're not a social worker, they're not somebody that if I say something wrong, my mom might get in trouble. And so they might let their guard down around these people. So secretaries, they have all of the information. They are the hub of information and sometimes more information than we need to know. But they really help us in some of the cases where if we call and say, hey, we saw that little Johnny showed up late today, he didn't ride our van, we're just kind of wondering, did they bring him in a vehicle or, and they'll have all the information that it was a red car. And then this lady with blonde hair was driving and I've never seen her before. They didn't come in, and they'll have all this information for you. And sometimes when you piece that together with what you know, with what the school social worker knows, it starts to make sense, or it might tell a story that maybe we were missing some things. And the people in the lunch lines that are handing out lunch, if a child is always wanting more or is always needing extra food, or makes a comment to the person next to them in line, like, boy, I haven't eaten since I was here yesterday, those kinds of things, they can always go to their building social worker or admin to say, hey, I think, little Susie might be in trouble. There might be something going on at home. Maybe somebody better check in with her. And then the bus drivers, they hear a lot of stuff, probably more than they want to hear. But we've had bus drivers, hear things like, or kids that sleep on the bus all the time. They're sleeping because they didn't get any sleep last night because they were, sleeping in the hallway of the motel. It was loud. There's a lot of partying going on, or the people they're staying with were partying. We had a child just this year who was sleeping in a trailer house. Underneath, they had a huge mounted TV, and the place they chose for him to sleep was right under the big TV on the floor with no pillow and a baby blanket. And the kid was not getting any rest because they had the TV on pretty much all night long, very loudly. And because he was in the living room, if anybody was up, he was up. And so we ended up, buying him a air mattress with a full comforter set and sheets and all that kind of stuff. And it didn't take away the fact of the loudness, but it gave him a little more sense of his space. And we, even talked to the family about moving where he stays, at night to a different part of the living room, possibly. So just having those conversations with them when we know those kinds of things are going on at home. But bus drivers do hear a lot of things that can be very helpful to us too, when we're trying to work with families. This is our enrollment. So the first time that we started this program was in 2006. I don't know if anybody knows Carrie Gross, but she has Carrie's kids now. She had this position first. And so she started it, and that first year they had 136 kids identified, which I think for being the first year of it, I feel like that's a lot when you didn't really know what you were maybe dealing with back then. And then you can kind of see where our numbers went from there, kind of have been hovering. The interesting part is that right before COVID, actually kind of the start of COVID, but was the 19-20 school year, and we had 514 kids identified. That's been the largest that we've had. And then you see there was a huge dip after COVID. And that doesn't mean that, COVID made homelessness go away. What that means is all of our children were learning virtually, and we weren't getting our eyes and ears on them per se. Some of the teachers like to say, I couldn't smell, touch, or see them in person. And that can make a difference, especially if a child's experiencing bad hygiene, if there's maybe domestic violence or something going on in the home and they're not sleeping well. Those are things that are really hard to pick up over a computer screen. And so we weren't able to connect with our students and families like we wanted to during that time. And so that is the main reason why our numbers dipped, and not just ours, it was a national thing. I go to a national conference every year, and it was across the board nationwide after COVID. That connection that we lost with the in-person learning took a huge toll on us trying to help families. And then we've kind of, like I said, we've been hovering around, that 400 to 500, sometimes 450 number since we've been taking inventory. So I would say that we probably be a little bit low this year. And again, no real reason for that I know of, that I've heard of yet, because I have a lot of families that are being evicted. So sometimes it's just we're not hearing about them in a timely manner. And as far as new ones coming in, sometimes we have a huge flux of them coming in if there's, let's say, people in the area hiring. So if they're, if Sanford or Cloverdale or those kinds of businesses that kind of tend to hire in bulk from out of state come in, sometimes we have a huge influx of kids who are in transition at that point too. And then here's just some data that I got from the DPI website, which is the Department of Public Instruction. So if you kind of wanted to compare us to other bigger towns in North Dakota, where we're at with our numbers. So Bismarck is the biggest school district in North Dakota, because Fargo, West Fargo, that's all split. And so it probably makes sense that we do have the highest numbers majority of the time, but we do have a lot of towns. Williston, obviously population wise isn't as big as Bismarck, but because of the oil business out there and that rural situation, they have a lot of transient families that come through there. You're seeing increases in the Fargo and Grand Forks area. Again, with a lot of maybe refugees that come in those areas and settle. And so that's kind of where we are across North Dakota for the last school year, where we were at. Now it says 423 for Bismarck. That is K through 12. So 0 through 5 age. They don't keep those numbers. We keep those as a separate thing. So that's where we got 474. If you're wondering if I had lost my mind, that's why the different numbers are there. And then I just wanted to touch a little bit about, like, if we think about, an adult person that's homeless, but like, what are our children experiencing on a daily basis who might not have that stability of a home life, of where they know they're going to be at, right? They don't know where, sometimes when they're waking up, where they're at exactly, or remember where they're staying this time, not getting breakfast, unless they get to school. We always make sure kids we're transporting, we make sure that they get a breakfast when they get to school. Even if we're running late, we call ahead and make sure, because we feel that's super important, because not a lot of these children get breakfast at home or have that ability to do that. Do their clothes stink? Have they been able to do laundry? Do they have access to laundry and clean clothes? Do they even have like the tools to do their hygiene? Do they have a brush? Do they have shampoo and conditioner or soap? Can they comb their hair? Do they have deodorant? Just those kinds of things that if you're going place to place to place, sometimes you don't either carry those or you leave them someplace and then you're out and you don't have the money to purchase new ones. Are they going to get to school? Because now this new place is a lot farther from where they were walking before. Do they have to walk? Do they have to, is it winter and do they have the winter gear to walk in that kind of weather? Do they know how to get there? Are they old enough to get there on their own? Which obviously would cause to have anxiety about getting to school. And a lot of these, well, most of these children who are experiencing this, they want to be in school. They want to be there, and we want them there because we want eyes and ears on them. We want them to have at least two meals a day that are provided for them. They get stability, they get love, they get attention when they're there, and they want to be there. They don't want to stay in that hotel room all day long, or they don't want to stay with grandma all day. It's boring to them. They would rather be in school. So they might, take it upon themselves to get dressed up, maybe not even in the best winter clothes, and walk to school, no matter how far it is. Were they able to sleep the night before? We talked about partying. Did they have enough blankets when it's cold? A lot of our kids that come to school end up coming to school and they sleep the first 2 hours of the day, because that is the only way they're going to get anything done. It almost is incorporated into their daily plan, because otherwise they are zombies. And if we think about any of us who have had kids, and they never, they never slept when they were babies, and how we tried to function when we were going on no sleep, let alone a child who's malnourished and, doesn't have that sleep. And we're expecting them to, sit right, act right, don't cause any behaviors, get your work done, be a straight A student, when they're just they're in survival mode. Like they're literally in survival mode. Sometimes they are eating all of their lunch within a matter of seconds because they don't want it to get taken away from them. Or they're trying to hoard to bring back to have food later, or for their siblings. We've had students that have done that, tried to take food for their siblings and hide it for them. A lot of anxiety comes with physical aspects, right? So lots of aches and pains, a lot of stomach aches, headaches, and that can be from the anxiety, or it can be from not having enough food, or enough water, those kinds of things. And then just towards the end of the day, who's going to pick me up? Where am I getting picked up at? Will I know the person that mom sends to pick me up in? Am I supposed to go with them? Where are we going to eat tonight? My auntie said that we can't come back. Did mom find a place for us to go? Am I going to be able to shower yet? I haven't been able to shower. And then the biggest one is, am I safe? I think that's the biggest concern that we all have with the families that we work with and the children is, are they safe where they're at? And sometimes no. Sometimes it is a huge safety risk of where they're staying, but it's their only option. And so unfortunately they put themselves in those situations to stay off of the streets or to stay, in from the outside cold. So these are some of the things that when we work with our families, obviously that they go through and that they feel at any given time of us working with them. We talked about they are ashamed, they don't want to share that information. They are exhausted. A lot of the families, parents we work with are exhausted themselves. They again are functioning at such a high anxiety level of the fight or fight mode of survival that they can't see past their own nose because they are so overwhelmed, and every little task seems to be so huge, and even just getting their kids to school is not something that's on their radar. They're just wanting to survive. Just having that lack of control of their situation that they might feel. They might be hungry, feel at such a loss. There's no reason to really try anymore. And then because they are experiencing that survival mode, they might become desperate. So they might have to do things to save their family or their children, which comes to be some reckless behavior, making some bad decisions, doing some illegal activity, whether it's maybe selling drugs to get some money or stealing, lying usually about their situation because they're used to having to do that, hiding their situation so nobody knows about it because again, they're worried, about people finding out and maybe social services or the police being involved. So again, our families are usually functioning at some kind of high anxiety level when we're meeting with them and working with them. So I just put this on here because I like to put in a little bit of a plug because part of my job is I'm an advocate, right? And my job is I advocate for the student, for the children. I don't necessarily advocate for the parent because sometimes that's not the same thing. And so some of the conversations I have, especially with people who are landlords and experience working with some of these families, I've done this for 25 years, as I said before. This isn't my first rodeo. I know that things that the families talk to me about or tell me has happened, like I got evicted and I have no idea why. I'm not a chump. Like I know that maybe half of what they're telling me is true, but I have to do my due diligence in trying to advocate in what is in the best interest for that child and trying to help that family. And so I might start doing my own investigation. I might get a release for housing or get a release for them to let me call their landlord and say, hey, can you just let me know what's going on here so I can understand? And sometimes those conversations that I've had with landlords have went very, very well. They appreciated it. And some are not wanting to give the time of day to that family because of past experiences, with the way the family has treated them, the way maybe the family has treated the apartment or whatever they're leasing, which I totally understand. And so I'm not either here to say either, you know, landlords are terrible in this community. I'm not here to say that landlords are exceptionally good in this community. I'm just here based upon what I experience when I'm trying to help a family through a situation. So you might not agree with some of the things that I say or my view on that, but I would think that that's fair because you're coming from a different avenue of, of being the landlord and having to go through, those things with that family. We always talk about second chances. I know there's landlords in town that give second, third, and fourth chances. Some of them more than I ever would have given. And so I think we have, we deal with a lot of different landlords that are very good to work with and some that are not. And I think that's just part of any kind of a community. But I'm not trying to talk bad about any landlords in town. I'm just trying to talk about my experience when I work with the families. So I always just put that up there for a little heads up. But and that's just wanted to kind of throw that out there, like the discussions I have with my families and landlords. Sometimes I'm trying to be a mediator. Sometimes our families and our landlords both can get very hot-headed, very upset, very stuck in their ways. And so sometimes we try to de-escalate that to see if there is a way we can work something out. I never want to talk on behalf of my family or say that, I'm doing this because, I vouch for this family. Because I have learned from my mistakes that's not really good practice to go by. But if I feel that there is something of importance that maybe the family is not able to communicate in a professional manner or in a manner that isn't angry or whatnot, and maybe having the landlord understand coming from their position, or maybe even if I understand and I find the details from the landlord that I didn't know, which happens a lot, I can explain to the family and say, okay, you have to understand, like, this is their way of living. This is, they've given you these, options, these opportunities, and you weren't able to. So it's kind of a back and forth that I try to do just to de-escalate any of those kinds of situations. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. It's just too far gone. And I respect every decision that the landlords make, as long as it's, it's a fair decision and it's been something across the board and not just something that they're doing for one family and not the other. I see that a lot in my work, and it happens. And I totally get that, because if you have a family that's, treated you good and has tried to do everything to the best of their ability, you're most likely going to maybe, give them a little more leeway than maybe the other family. And I get that. But some of the situations that we deal with, people are afraid to talk about. Maybe the living conditions aren't where they're supposed to be, or there's something going on, but they don't want to bug the landlord because it really is their only place to stay. And so they just decide to live in whatever situation it is. Things I've dealt with are like toilets backing up and there being like feces all over, and them not wanting to call the landlord because they're afraid the landlord will get upset and evict them for that. And so they just choose to live in that. So there's a lot of fear coming from them too. And I think a lot of that emotion that landlords might see is fear. And granted, there's a whole lot of reasons why there's how do I say, arguments between landlords and our families is because of the fear. And then there's also obviously drugs and alcohol, mental health. There's a whole bunch of different reasons why things could go sideways on either end. So, but those are the things that we try to do. So if you ever get a phone call from me, I'm just trying to do the best I can and make sure that the students have a safe place to be. These are the types of services our program can provide. We, obviously we're advocates, and so we, try to do our best within getting them resources in the community. We do provide transportation for those who can't get to school to and from, that we discussed before. Sometimes we can take them to their medical appointments or a psychological appointment if they need mental health services during the school day. Maybe we try to get parents to go to parent-teacher conferences or to be involved in their students' education. Anything financial that the school might be sending a note home or an email to the family saying you owe money for this, this program would help pay for. So they automatically get free breakfast and lunch, and so they don't have any kind of a lunch bill. Anything to be a part of school athletics or clubs or anything like that, we waive that fee, and then we help them if they need equipment or shoes to do track or something like that. We help pay for those kinds of things. We rent instruments for kids, kids who are in art club or take an art class. We buy them their own like at-home art kit kind of things so they can do some things at home. So we're able to help them out with that financial kind of piece too. And there's many different things that we help out with. Medications, sometimes families come and they forgot an inhaler, or they left so fast that they left an inhaler or insulin behind, something that is needed. And because of their insurance, they can't get another one. And so we'll go and pay for that for them to be able to have that in the meantime of their insurance getting figured out. That has happened a lot in the last couple of years is the medication piece. We provide them with school supplies and a backpack and winter gear every year. They're able to get that from us. One of the things that we started doing was paying for housing application fees. Because they might be applying for an apartment with one landlord, but maybe they're trying to put in for 5 different ones. That can be very spendy for someone who doesn't have the money to do it in the first place. And so we help with paying whatever that application fee is for the background check and such. We've been able to do that so far the past couple years, which has really been helpful for some families, because that was a barrier for them to try to get someplace. They're saving as much money as they can, and they needed every penny, to get security deposit and all that kind of stuff. And we can't do that, so we thought that maybe we'd help out with the application fee. We help pay for GED testing. We pay for college application fees, graduation stuff, so the cap and gown and all those kinds of things that they want to get to walk through. We'll pay for that so they can have that experience as well. And then I can write a letter if they're an unaccompanied youth in their senior year where they weren't living with their parents. I can write a letter to the college that they're applying for saying that they were in this program, and because of the McKinney-Vento law, they cannot take their family's income into consideration when they're applying for FAFSA, which obviously can be a huge thing for some of these unaccompanied youth who are trying to get that higher education and trying to fulfill a dream of getting a college degree. And then just a little bit about, all the services, like I talked about, once you are in the program, you get those services for the rest of the year, no matter if your situation changes. Just because you maybe, were in a shelter at the beginning of the school year and you end up getting your own place, we know that all of a sudden now you didn't come into a bunch of money and your problems go away. Like, we still want to help you. So financially, we're going to do that through the school year as much as we can with your education to take away, so you don't have to spend money on anything like that, and you can put it towards utilities or whatever it may be. We talked about wanting to make sure that the school or the child stays in their school of origin, and so we provide our transportation for that. We have our van program where we hire drivers, and it's just a BPS van, minivan, and it acts as an Uber, and we do routes. And we do routes every day for the following day of picking up a student of where they're currently at and taking them to their school of origin. We've been doing the van program now for 5 or 6 years. And the very first, within the first 6 weeks of doing it as a pilot project, 6 years ago, we had a kindergarten little girl talk about her sexual abuse that was happening in her hotel room with her dad to our driver, because that driver was somebody that she felt trustworthy, that she could talk to. They were alone in the van. That was somebody that she knew every day was going to pick her up and drop her off. She had established a relationship with that van driver, and felt like that was a safe place to talk about that. And so we were able to get social services involved immediately that day, and the police down at the hotel with the family and having them take care of that. And so I believe that one little girl proved my point of why we shouldn't use taxis, why we shouldn't, put them in basically other vehicles that we can't control who we are hiring to work with these kids who are experiencing trauma, or experiencing some kind of abuse at home. And so the van program has stuck around, and we went from one van to now we have 7 within the district. And so it has been a really good addition to the program the last 5-6 years. We also provide that transportation because South Central High School does not provide busing. So we have a lot of our unaccompanied youth that go there, couch surfers, things like that. And so we provide transportation for them to get there. And then in any kind of emergency situation, obviously we will do the best we can to help out. One of the rules that we have as a policy for BPS is if you don't have your vaccinations up to date, you will have to miss school until they are. We cannot do that under McKinney-Vento law. The transition kids that we work with, all we can do is encourage them to, and we can try to help get them to an appointment to get their shots or their vaccinations, but they cannot miss any school based upon that alone. That's written into the federal law. And then we can also never deny any enrollment in school just because they don't have the right paperwork. So they could come in basically with no paperwork, and living in the shelter, and we have to immediately enroll them in our school. And then we help work on getting them that paperwork, whether it's birth certificate or those kinds of things. We can, on the back end, pay for them to get those documents, or order those documents for them, so they do have them for future references and services that they might need. So that is actually kind of our program in a nutshell. It's a lot of information. It's something, like I said, that not everybody knows about in the community. That, basically every district in North Dakota and the United States has to have a homeless liaison. And so, this is not just a Bismarck problem. We have it in the rural areas. We have it obviously in the bigger towns too. But it is something that we deal with every day. We're not going anywhere. The numbers pretty much are steady. And with the economy the way it is, I would anticipate next year being a very, very busy year for this program. So I just want to say I appreciate you guys listening and taking my view on things. And I appreciate what you do. And when you do work with our families and provide that safe place, for them to be and work with the family. I know they might not show you their appreciation, but I am appreciative of it, and what you do. And I hope that there are more of the good ones out there, that more than the other ones, because we have a lot of families that have different situations that could really need your help. And so I just appreciate what you guys do and for listening. Are there any questions?
There aren't any in the chat as of right now, but if
Okay.
anyone has questions, can ask them. While they're if you guys have questions you can think about, but thank you, Charisse, for presenting today and taking time out of your schedule.
Yes.
If anyone thinks of any questions, you can definitely reach out to us, or you can reach out to Charisse here. Her email address is on. Oh, here's a question. How many kids do you suppose get rides daily?
From us on the van, we were just doing our stats the other day. Right now, we don't have a lot riding on our van because we also have other forms of transportation we do. We can give, if a person has their own way of getting there. So they have their own vehicle. We will do a gas card promotion with them. So meaning this way they get to have some dignity and pride in, you know, taking their kid to school every day. But maybe financially they can't afford that gas. And so we'll give them a gas card, and then every 10 days they can ask for another one, but we check the attendance. So if the attendance is good within those 10 days, then they can get another one. And then we can keep doing that. So with that gas card program, really it's only in its second year. We've really lowered the numbers in our vans on a daily basis. But sometimes we have anywhere from 12 to 15 students in one van because of the way we do our routes, dropping off, picking up, and those kinds of things at one time. Right now, I think we only have 4, and we have 1 van going. We have 4 before school and after school. But I would say that I can't remember what the number was that we've done in our vans so far this year. So sorry.
Any other questions? Well, with that, I think we will wrap up for today. Thank you again for presenting, Charisse.
Yep, thank you guys.
Next week, we have service animals with Department of Labor. So if you are interested in that, please plan on joining. Thanks again. Have a great rest of the day and week, everybody.